a new episode of the Sri Lankan Understanding, where we are looking at the historical, archaeological and cultural aspects of Sri Lanka in order to understand our past so that we can make better decisions in the future. We are here today at the Maitland Stateroom in the beautiful Mount Lavinia Hotel, which is our location sponsor for this episode. My name is Lilanka Botejue. I'm a tea trainer and marketer by day. At night, I'm a writing night owl, and I have a passion for archaeology, which I followed by doing a Master of Science in Archaeology. And I have with me here today Chryshane.
I'm Chryshane Mendis. I'm an independent researcher who focusing on archaeology and history. I have also completed my master's in archaeology and plan to pursue higher studies, and my research mainly focuses around colonial period archaeology, mainly around the forts and old buildings.
So Chryshane is here with us today to discuss a very interesting topic, something we are familiar with, but we may not know too much about. So we are looking at the built heritage of the Dutch in Sri Lanka. So Chryshane, what do you mean by this Dutch period in Sri Lanka? Would you care to elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure, yes. So when we talk about the Dutch period, we are mainly talking about the occupation timeline of the Dutch East India Company in Sri Lanka. That is mainly beginning from 1638 to 1796. So that's when they were in full control over mostly the coastal territories of Sri Lanka. And so a small interesting point there is when we speak about Dutch, of course they are from the Dutch Republic back then, but we were never directly governed by the Dutch government of that time.
Okay.
So we were under the Dutch East India Company. It was a complete private company which had the mandate to draw up treaties and make war with any of their overseas, with any other foreign country. So that was a very interesting situation back in the past, where this was the first, you could say, multinational global empire, but it was a corporation.
Interesting.
So yeah,
the first of the multinational globalization projects.
Yeah, and so we were basically back then, the coastal areas were under
the Dutch East India Company,
so or the VOC.
Oh, that's very interesting. Oh, okay,
yeah.
okay.
And so it's this time period where there was a lot of social and cultural changes taking place. That was mainly almost the full run of the 18th century or the 1700s. And so it is most of the cultural phenomena during this time period that we speak of as the Dutch period. But sometimes it depends on the context as well, because it's parallel to also the Kingdom of Kandy. So when we say about, when we say the Dutch period, it also encompasses the local native independent Kingdom of Kandy, but depending on the situation, it is like that. So this is the broader scope
of what the Dutch period is. So what is this built heritage of the Dutch, Chryshane? When we say the built heritage, what are we talking about?
Like during their run in Sri Lanka, the Dutch were engaged only in 2 wars with the local Kingdom of Kandy, but for the most of it, it was largely peaceful. So there was about 150 years and then just about 10 years of warfare. But the rest of it, there was much more stability. There was relatively, they were on relatively friendly terms with the Kingdom of Kandy. And because of that, the coastal territories under the Dutch were able to flourish, and they were able to make more permanent settlements, much unlike the Portuguese to a certain extent. And so because of that, you actually see a lot of buildings. So built heritage, when you speak of, it's in terms of buildings originating from the Dutch territories, or that's why we call the Dutch period, that we still see today. And the largest of these is the forts, which we see littered around the coast of Sri Lanka.
Sri Lanka, yes.
And so again, most of these forts, there are again almost every historical site is a layered past. So when we say the Dutch forts as well, historically they're based on my research, I did a inventorying of the VOC fortifications, to say, of during Sri Lanka for my master's thesis.
That's nice.
And so I noted down about 60 various fortifications from large forts. 60,
wow.
Yeah. So from large forts like Colombo and Galle to small outposts like Arippu or Elephant Pass. And so what we see now, there is actually 11 complete forts as it is, and about another 11 or 12 more forts that are in sort of various conditions, like what we were previously discussing on a different episode of Colombo. We find a gate here, a couple of pieces of the wall there, like that. So there is still about 20 such sites that you can still see these large military structures from the Dutch period. And again, so many of the fortresses were originating from the Portuguese period. And what the Dutch did was because their military architecture at this time was evolving, and the Dutch were ahead of their time. Or rather, they had a separate school of military architecture. So based on the ground plans, you can actually identify what is a Dutch fort and maybe what is a Portuguese one. And so wherever they captured Portuguese forts, if it fitted into their sort of new plan, they incorporated the Portuguese fort, like the wall or the bastion, into it. So like, but largely what we see now are mainly constructions from the Dutch period. For example, if you take the Jaffna fort, what we see now, the layout is a complete Dutch fort. But there was also a Portuguese fort on the side. And there are certain sections of the Portuguese wall that the Dutch, after capturing the fort, they incorporated onto it, because the Portuguese fort was more of a square or rather quadrangular structure. And now during the Civil War, certain sections of the fort was demolished. And you can actually see internally the areas where the walls have broken down, the old Portuguese wall inside. So like that, there are a couple of forts where you have varying degree of Portuguese remains incorporated into the fort, but it is still possible to call that the entire fort as a Dutch fort. So like that, we have so many from Jaffna, Mena, Kalpitia, Negambugor, like it's right round.
What are some of the unknown ones? Now we know the Dutch and the Colombo fort, you know, the Gaul fort.
Unknown one, so there was also a certain time where the Dutch pushed into the inland as far as Openaika in the Sabaragamu province. Yeah, and so they also built a couple of forts there. So there was one in Ratnapura, which most likely they reused the old Portuguese fort that was there. And then they built a fort at Sitavaka. So that's again, you can see the entire fort. It is not well preserved, but the four-sided walls and the bastions are still there, like what we discussed on the previous episode. So that is there. Then also, like I said, you get in different varying degrees. You get the remains of the Hangvalda fort. You get part of the moat.
That is the one that is inside
the rest house.
Yes. So that's quite internal, no, when you think about it. But I suppose for them, coastal would have extended to that to an extent as well.
Yes. So, like I said earlier, Sitavaka was actually their border of the territory with the Candian kingdom. And then, so there was possibly like a 30 to 40 kilometer stretch from the coast, especially along the western seaboard. But at certain points, like I said, they expanded into passing Ratnapura as well. So then for about 10 years, they had a fort in Ratnapura, but they abandoned it. So Ratnapura, Arandara, many of these areas there were, but then those were all backtracked. And so I think presently the most well preserved remote fort is the fort of Katuvana, that is north of Matara. It's a very nice fort, a small fort with two bastions, and I think it's about 40 kilometers north of Matara.
Very interesting. So we are going in for a small break. Stay tuned as Chryshane tells us more about the Dutch period. So we are back again discussing the built heritage of the Dutch in Sri Lanka. So Chryshane was just telling us about the Dutch period and also some of the unknown forts around Sri Lanka. So now a question to ask you, Chryshane, were these really built by the Dutch themselves, now when they call it Dutch built heritage?
Yes. So like the forts, there were also the Dutch churches. So we know of three main large churches that we still find, or rather, so what we find in Gaul, the Gaul church and the Wolvendal church in Colombo are very unique Dutch period buildings. They were built in the mid 1700s and they have a distinct Dutch and European architecture, and they are large churches. The third was inside the Jaffna fort, but unfortunately that was
really?
Destroyed.
There was a church there?
There was a church, and so there is actually color photographs of it in the 90s, but it was completely
during the war, possibly, right?
Completely demolished during the war. So, but apart from those main churches, there were also sort of village level churches that evolved in a very more domestic style architecture. You get some in Kalpitia, Mathura and places like that. And apart from that, you also get warehouses here and there. So like in the Galle Fort, the current Maritime Museum is a very
warehouse.
impressive warehouse.
Okay.
Then even in Colombo, you get sort of a double barrel roof warehouse. So these are the kind of built heritage you see at present, the churches, the warehouses and the forts. There are few other public buildings or private houses which associate from the Dutch times. Definitely the Dutch Hospital in Petta and the Dutch Period Museum in Dutch Hospital in Colombo Fort and the Dutch Period Museum in Petta.
Petta, okay.
So those were more secular structures that have a very clear origin from the Dutch times.
Right.
But there is also another, rather like you said, Sri Lankans also sometimes associate various other buildings as Dutch. So many other either fortresses themselves or also domestic buildings such as houses.
Anything that looks remotely European is Dutch.
Yes, so there is this interesting phenomena, I would say, how at least for the last 100 years people have tend to call anything like you said old, dating from the colonial period, as Dutch. Some which are very clearly British period buildings as well.
Yes.
So I'm not too sure how that actually took place, but
I think it's a question of not really knowing. So anything remotely European looking. So if you take it like that roof with pillars, immediately Dutch style.
Definitely. So I think that's also where the historical imagination of the Dutch period has been sort of captured into the memory of the public, and it's still being passed down. That yes, there was an influence from the Dutch on architecture, but as architect Ashley DeVos, who is also an authority on this type of architecture, he says that there is no actual Dutch architecture in Sri Lanka. So he describes these monuments or the architecture that comes out of these monuments as stemming from of dual parentage. They incorporated using certain materials, maybe from the Netherlands, and various styles incorporated to the local climate. So because the intrusion of European architecture style starts from the Portuguese, even into domestic styles. In terms of how the windows are designed, the shapes of the roofs, everything. And so then that just continues when the Dutch take over as well. So you had the masons and the basers from the Portuguese onwards who continued during the Dutch times, and then that was passed down. And then, so architecture evolves. And so yes, there was a particular distinct style of domestic architecture, if you say, during the Dutch period. And that continued well into the British times as well in the 1800s. So in 1796, the British take over. And then at least for the next 50, 60 years, this type of architecture just continues because there is no real reason to break off with that architecture. So that's why you find sometimes in these old houses large or long windows. So that's a characteristic that came from the Dutch period. But you find them well into the British period as well. So that's where sometimes people look at these large masonry columns, the large old windows, and they
or a rounded archway.
Or the rounded arch.
Yes, and you immediately call it Dutch. So what you're basically saying is that basically it was sort of like a amalgamation, like a Dutch nourished kind of architecture that sort of, and then along with the British, I suppose that influence also would have. So we have our own hybrid kind of, in a sense.
It's a hybrid in a sense because it includes the local tradition as well as European ones that have adapted to the climate over here. So even an example, like I earlier said, even the fort, yes, the Dutch had a distinct plan, but how you built the fort, the kind of materials used, was adapted to suit the local climate. So in the Netherlands, these forts, if you would still find forts like the Jaffna Fort in that same layout in the Netherlands, but those are built out of earth alone. But here to suit the local climate, because you can't just have an earth fort because the monsoon will wash it away. Soil. So you had to build it out of stronger material with coral or stone. So even that you see an adaptation to local climatic situations.
Oh, right. Okay, so that's a very interesting point. So we are going in for a short break. We will be back with more information. Stay tuned. We're back again now discussing the built heritage of the Dutch in Sri Lanka with Chryshane. So Chryshane, you were going to tell us a little bit about these misconceptions people have, you know, in Sri Lanka. We see any kind of European style building and we're like, ah, that's a Dutch period building. So you want to give us some examples of
yes,
this?
because I feel it'll be interesting to just clarify these as well.
Yes.
Like I said, so if you start with the forts, there's a very good example of a misconception, the Ruanvälä fort.
Okay.
So Ruanvälä is a little bit north of Avisavella.
Right.
And so there is a fort currently which houses the police station.
Yes.
And
I have been there.
yeah,
Yes.
and so a lot of people, including people from the state officials, call that a Dutch fort,
Okay.
but that is very clearly a British fort.
Okay.
There is a date saying 1817, it was created by the British.
Oh,
you have
right.
enough of documentation on that.
To prove it.
And the Dutch, why it is confused as the Dutch fort is because the Dutch also had a fort in Ruanvälä for a very short time.
Okay.
But that's actually on the other side of the river.
Right.
And it's not very well known. Again, it's
Okay.
in a private land.
Okay.
Again, you don't see the full fort, but I've done some of my research and you can still see the outline of the moat there when you look
Okay.
at old historical maps.
Oh,
and so
right.
that's where the Dutch fort is, not
Okay.
the one you see
Not
now.
in the police station.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so the same situation is repeated even in Ratnapura. So Ratnapura also, I think it's the police station there, is a British fort. You get the
Okay.
date as well.
Okay.
But again, why that confusion is because Ratnapura also had a Dutch fort at one point. And the exact location of that Dutch fort is not known.
Oh, right.
Because based on my readings, it's possible that the Dutch used the existing Portuguese fort.
fort. Okay.
And according to local belief, the Portuguese fort is where the Saman Devali is right now.
Oh,
so that
okay.
it's little outside of the town.
Right, right.
And then again, yet they call that British fort in the middle of the town. They call it a Dutch fort.
Dutch fort.
And another fun example is in Badulla, the Badulla market.
Okay.
There, that market, it's a open air market built in the style of a castle.
Oh,
so when you
okay.
look at it from outside, you actually get confused whether it's a fort or not.
Oh, right.
And yet that is called a Dutch fort. And it's not a fort, and it's not Dutch to begin with, because the Dutch never went to Badulla in the first place. It is a British period building built in the later 1800s
Oh, wow.
and built as a marketplace.
Right.
And for some reason they built it like a castle. I don't know. That would have been just an aesthetic choice.
Yes.
And like within the last 100 years, people have forgotten that. And you call it two completely different things. It's not a fort and it's not Dutch.
Not Dutch. So I think
So-
one of the things what comes out here is that look at the time period first and foremost, right?
Precisely, yeah.
If it's 1815 and above, obviously it's a British time.
Exactly, yeah.
Right, and also what else can we look out for so that we don't make this mistake, Chryshane? Anything to
So that's where it is a bit tough because, like I said,
It's
there is nothing precisely to define what is an architecture form from the Dutch period. You get certain archetypes, but then you also see that style continuing into the early British times as well.
Okay.
So I would be very careful when we approach certain heritage, if you're dealing with old houses and all, whether to call it a Dutch building or a British building and all. You have to be a bit more careful when you're approaching these kind of things. Just because you see certain architectural designs does not mean that represent that time period necessarily.
Okay.
So especially in domestic architecture. So
Right.
yeah, then you would really need to go do archival studies and everything. But there are certain architectural styles that you can say are very old,
Right.
which you can clearly rule out beyond the 20th century.
Okay.
So then you're giving a bit more generalized.
Generalized.
So.
Okay.
But in general, there is this the Dutch built heritage of the Dutch is you find the forts, the churches, and also interestingly canals,
Ah, yes.
which is surprisingly a less studied aspect in Sri Lanka. So the Dutch, they were very much commercial minded, so they had various irrigation projects to increase the productivity of the paddy fields in this area. So there were canals from in Panadur area, in Mathura,
Vattala.
so various Vattala,
Yes.
Nigambo, so various dikes
Yes.
and canals constructed. So that's also another heritage which not many people realize.
Yes, and I think even the fact that even today the Netherlands has so many canals themselves,
Precisely, yes.
right, and they use it very well, and certain cities are totally like that. Gitong or something is very like,
Exactly,
you know,
yeah. So
it's just like a little Venice. So I think even in terms of the canal systems we have in Sri Lanka, I think at one point they were asking the Dutch for assistance in how we can sort of mobilize the canal system again.
Yes.
But I think these projects have fallen through the cracks because it's like you said, and like we discussed in a previous episode, you know, even the name for the bere, we think comes from the De Beer or something, which is a Dutch origin name. We don't really know, but they use it extensively for the transportation of goods. And of course, in today's context, it would be great to look at even a ferry system for transport, since we have such a huge
because there
problem.
are so much of even canals even from Kotte side, like the Diwana is connected to
the
Colombo.
Diwana has such a huge network. I mean, I was fortunate to go on a boat ride last year, and the backwaters of the Kotte Kingdom, that is a fabulous network we have so underutilized. Even the Beira Canal network, Hamilton Canal, all these eventually fall down there. So, I mean, Sri Lanka has a lot of potential. So, it's interesting in terms of Dutch built heritage that the canals we have not totally looked at. And even the forts, like you said, I didn't realize there are 60 around Sri Lanka. So, there is
historically. Like, so
but you know, it's still, I mean, though you may not find the remnants of it, you still, you know that they were there.
Exactly, So you can, and possibly in many places there are still at least names of saying, you know, where the fort was. Somebody's private land might have a ditch that matches the outline of the fort. So there's a lot of research to be done also on this.
Yes. So in terms of like preservation and the future of this, what do you see here, Chryshane?
Well, of course, it's, I think like we've been also discussing on previous episodes, that it's important to understand what heritage is around you and whether that heritage relates to personally your ancestors or not. I don't think that really matters.
Yes,
like,
that is true.
It shouldn't matter whether this was built by a Dutchman or a Sinhalese or a Tamil.
Yes.
Like if you're within a particular neighborhood, if there's something old, that the fact that it has survived a couple of decades, centuries even, shows that that area has so much of history and things to speak about itself. Like it's the memory of the people who had lived there in that area, just like you do now.
Yeah.
So it's important whether you live there or whether you work in a place. If there is anything old, those sites are sites of memory. So if you look at it from that aspect, it would be interesting to see how we could incorporate those sites of memory with the development. Of course, you can't stop society just because there's something old. You know, we have to progress, we have to move forward. But there's always ways that you can balance these heritage with development.
And there are lots of examples, I think, from around the world.
And I believe the core of it is interest.
Yes.
If you are interested, you can make that change. You don't need to wait till you inscribe this through a Department of Archaeology Act or something like that. No, if you have that interest, you can make that intervention yourself.
That is true. Yeah, so I think that's an important note to end on. So we've come to the end of our episode. So thanks, Chryshane. So learning about the built heritage of the Dutch in Sri Lanka, and our call out to you is to be interested in where you live and see what's around you so that you can celebrate that memory and help preserve it for the future. So thank you for joining in, and we'll catch you on the next episodes where we're understanding the past to better understand our future.